My name is Mick Fowler and I'm 67 now. I've been climbing for about 50 years. Well, it was my father that I have to thank, really. We lived in Wembley in North London. He had a group of friends that he would meet occasionally down on the southern sandstone outcrops around Tunbridge Wells. Gradually, I started climbing there as well. Realised that I was quite good at it, which is always an encouraging factor for a young man. The great thing about being in London was that, might sound rather strange this, but there was no climbing nearby. So there was a climbing club, the North London Mountaineering Club. There I gathered together a good group of friends, and every weekend we would go away somewhere. It introduced me to new areas around the UK, different rock types, and just a fantastic introduction to the great outdoors that we have in the UK. It was equally easy, let's say, for us to go climbing in North Wales as it was to go climbing in Cornwall, as to go climbing the chalk cliffs down in Dover. Because I was going to different places all the time, I had a toe in an awful lot of the climbing communities. So if I went to North Wales in those days, everybody would go drinking in the Berghaus Hotel. And so I would know all the people from Liverpool and Majesty who'd gone climbing in North Wales. If I went to Scotland, sort of everybody would go to the Clackaig and I'd meet the Scottish climbing crew. Because we were climbing all over the country, it meant that I was became friends with an awful lot of climbers. It was an area of the UK that I gradually fell in love with. Probably has become my favourite area of the UK. The great thing about it was we could choose where we wanted to climb. Go into a corrie and there would be a pretty good chance that there'd be an obvious ice streak waiting to be climbed. It felt very exploratory and very adventurous. A bit like my perhaps later climbing in the Himalaya. I became very enthusiastic about this, such that I think my record was 11 consecutive weekends from London, with a lot of driving involved and a lot of quite sleepy Mondays in the office. By the early 1980s, I'd been climbing in the Alps for 5 or 6 years. I had done the classic north faces of the Alps, the Eiger, the Matterhorn and such like. And I was wondering quite where to climb next. Alps, who was a very well-known British mountaineer at that time, he recommended that I have a look at Peru because there were mountains that were not as high as the Himalaya, in the region of 6,000 metres. Most importantly, there were no specific permits required, so it was very easy to climb there. I did a bit of research and I found a photograph on a calendar that my father had of a mountain called Talarahu. And I remember showing this photograph to Alps and saying, "What about this one?" And I remember him saying, "Well, I don't know whether it's been climbed, just go there and have a good time." We got a team together, went there in 1982, and it was my first time outside Europe. And it was a wonderfully new period for me. It was like an extension of what I'd been climbing in the Alps. And we'd never spent so many nights out. I think we spent 4 nights on the face. And climbing in the Alps, I'd only ever spent, I think, a maximum of 2 nights on a climb. But the climbing was absolutely the sort of climbing I love. Really steep rock walls with ice smears, lots of uncertainty about whether we'd be good enough, and a fantastic feeling of elation when Chris Watts and I were successful and returned back down to base camp. There was so much retrospective pleasure that it made me think about the future. And in 3 weeks, we'd managed to acclimatise and climb a 5,800 metre peak. It was pretty clear to me that without much more time, we'd be able to acclimatise to higher altitudes and go climbing in the Himalaya. I could see a way of perhaps balancing that with working full time as well. The simplistic answer is they are the big mountain ranges of the world that are not the Alps. The Himalaya is attractive not just from the point of view of having wonderful unclimbed mountaineering objectives, but also having lots of cultural interest. The first Himalayan climb back in 1984, I remember, was a complete failure. We'd climbed some very hard technical climbs before going, and we thought we were great. And we failed absolutely dismally. But while we were there, we'd taken photographs, of course, of the horizon, and there'd been one very spectacular feature that had jumped out at us on a mountain called Spantic. And the feature had a name, the Golden Pillar. 3 years later, Victor Saunders showed me one of these photographs that we'd taken and said, I really think that we ought to go and try and climb this Golden Pillar. We did go out and we did climb it. And that was the start of my Himalayan career. The mountain must be doable in 4 to 5 weeks from the UK. There has to be an obvious line, a striking line leading hopefully directly to the summit. It has to be visible from afar. It has to be safe from avalanches and rockfall and such like. If it has a different descent route, then so much the better. That's more aesthetically pleasing to come down a different way. And if it's in a culturally interesting area that I've not been to before, then that just about ticks all of the boxes that I set for myself. I've been very fortunate that there's been quite a few over the years, but I suppose the one that I can think of immediately is a mountain called Gav Ding in the far west of Nepal, which was an unclimbed mountain, and there were no good photographs of it. We'd seen a very, very distant photograph that was published. It was back in 2015, so there were Google Earth images, but they were not that good in those days. You could set the time of day on Google Earth though, and by setting it to sort of lunchtime-ish, you could look at the shadows, and you can tilt it on Google Earth as well to look from an angle. And if you look from the south at midday, you could see how big the faces were by the shadows. And Gav Ding had a very big shadow cast by its north face. Well, no Westerner had actually been up the valley underneath the north side of Gav Ding. So we didn't really know whether or not it was going to be a successful trip or not, whether it was going to be a realistic objective. And when we got there, it was absolutely what we'd been looking for. It was a stunning line. It went absolutely straight to the summit. It was safe. It had a different descent route, and everything worked absolutely according to plan. And I can remember walking out through the autumn deciduous forests thinking what a fantastic trip that was. The moment that was probably most disappointing was standing on the glacier underneath a mountain called Sherikishtwar, an unclimbed mountain at that point in India, back in 1989, being absolutely fit, acclimatized, ready to go. And my climbing partner decided that it was not the climb for him. You've got to rely on your climbing partner, and if that's his decision, so be it. But it was disappointing, I have to admit. I stood on the glacier, I looked up at this wonderful unclimbed line going up to an unclimbed summit, and we just walked away. And that was a rare occasion that I did go back 4 years later. You need to know that they're the sort of person that has perhaps the same tolerance of risk as you have, that in a certain situation they're likely to behave in much the same way as you. With those thoughts in mind, most of my climbing partners over the years have been people that I've climbed with for a very long time. Not particularly having a tremendous ability, but having a good, safe approach to mountaineering and likely to make the same decisions as me in difficult situations. Things have changed hugely. Firstly, from the point of view of doing research on objectives, it used to be the case of poring over alpine journals, following up leads, speaking to people who'd been there before. Nowadays, Google Earth is the ultimate tool. The other thing that's changed hugely, our equipment nowadays is so much lighter, so much more waterproof. Other things that have changed hugely are the fact that because more trekkers have started to go to the Himalaya in particular, agents have sprung up in all of the Himalayan countries who will organise all of the in-country logistics for you. And it is just that, it's so much easier than it used to be. I'm always looking for an adventure, a climbing adventure, that will leave a good memory. Things like noticing that there was a frozen toilet outflow down the side of St Pancras station and managing to climb that back in 1987, I think it was. It's a great memory that's really etched in my mind. The small adventures can be every much as rewarding as the big ones. Balancing my climbing with work and with family, probably the main challenge to hold everything together, because the family's always been extremely important to me. Work has been important to me as much as it's a secure form of income to give me enough money to go climbing and to give the family enough money to have a good life. I stuck with the tax office really because initially it was a job that I took just to earn some money between alpine seasons back in the 1970s. It sat comfortably, if contrastingly, with my mountaineering holidays, where I would forget completely about tax things. And my tax office job as such, I really forgot about mountaineering and got on with my tax office job. And when I was at home, I got on with my family responsibilities. So I suppose everything was compartmentalised. I retired in 2016, and within 6 months of retiring, I was given a cancer diagnosis, cancer of the anus and of the lymph nodes. I had to cancel a mountaineering trip at short notice. How did I cope with that? I think probably the answer is in a kind of very pragmatic way. I'm a very pragmatic kind of person. And the doctors told me that I had cancer. I never really felt ill. Eventually, after radiotherapy and chemotherapy failed, it was decided that they should remove my entire rectum and anus. And I can remember I still felt perfectly well. I can remember sitting with a consultant. I can remember his words. He said, "I think we're able to offer you this operation. Would you like to go ahead?" And I can remember saying to him, "Well, I think that actually, are you sure that I'm ill? Because I don't feel it." He said, "Yes, we are sure." "Well, yes, then I think that would be a great idea. If you could remove my anus and give me a colostomy bag and all that kind of thing, then yes, please." And after that, I think it was a matter of accepting what was happening. There was nothing whatsoever that I could do about it. The cancer diagnosis and the operations, obviously they stopped me climbing for the period when I was convalescing. I think I had the operation on I remember very clearly, the 8th of August 2018, and I went to Sikkim to try and climb a mountain called Chombu with Victor in April 2019, which was probably a bit too early, to be honest. But I've been on 1, 2, 3 expeditions since then. So no, the climbing continues as ever. Inevitably, as you get older, your ability physically declines, but that doesn't mean that the enjoyment that I get from the outdoors declines. So I will carry on climbing for as long as I enjoy it and as long as I'm able. I think we're incredibly lucky in the UK. We have such a varied country, both from the point of view of climbing and the scenery in general. We have access land in the mountains and the right to roam in Scotland. We can explore within reason wherever we want to. We have a wonderful footpath network. I live in Matlock on the edge of the Peak District, and I just love walking around the footpaths, exploring the countryside, exercising the dog. Those things motivate me, get me outdoors.